Gobygal, and in this episode I'll be talking about part 2 in our many-step journey to making a really good aquarium. This step is about equipment, and I'll be covering all the essential and optional equipment that you can get for making a really good aquarium. So first we'll start with the general. First you will need a light bulb. This is pretty essential. Well, you could go with natural light, but if you want to have for freshwater, if you want to have live plants, or for saltwater, if you want corals, it also just makes your setup look a lot nicer to have a bright light to illuminate the tank. Filter, again, very essential. You'll need this. You can't run a tank without it. Also, a simple airhead or a simple aerator or perhaps a power head would also suffice. You don't necessarily need a filter, but it's some sort of filtration or thing to cause water movement to cause for aeration. Now a heater slash cooler I have on here, you might not need it in the end. For instance, the natural temperature of my house is the correct temperature on the water is fine. But if you live in a really hot place and say I want a goldfish tank, a cooler would probably be necessary. So there's that. Algae scraper, a must-have, even if you don't plan on having a lot of light there. You just have to have it. An algae scraper is a must. Water jugs or some sort of container to hold water for water changes when you get more water. I recommend for water changes using RO water. That's something I can get into if anyone. It's reverse osmosis water. You can also do dechlorination. That's another thing. So buckets and water jugs are must-have for any aquariums. Now for saltwater and brackish tanks, there's one really other more specific item that I would say that isn't necessarily necessary, but what many pet stores seem to recommend is getting a protein skimmer, which is sort of like an additional filter, but it will help. It sort of skims the water for removing excess. That'll be a little container at the top that'll gather some water, and you can take that and pour it out, and it'll get a lot of dirt and muck out. So it's pretty good. Apparently it helps keep the water clean. It's a pretty good item. If you can put it in your budget, I would recommend it. But I have a 10-gallon saltwater tank for maybe 5 years, and I have never had a I've never had a protein skimmer, and it seems to be doing just fine. I have goby, shrimp, and 2 clownfish in there right now. It's just fine. So then a lot of additional equipment. Now these might not necessarily be necessary, but it's a good idea to have some of the things on this list, maybe not all of them. So a spare tank or two is always good for if you let's say like quarantine. That's another thing. I haven't used a quarantine tank before, but that's also because it's a little out of my budget. But if you can afford it, a lot of people recommend it. You can monitor your fish to make sure they're healthy, make sure they don't have disease, so you don't just directly introduce a disease into your community tank. And also you can use it as a hospital tank for when a fish does get sick. I have a small tank which I've used as a hospital tank now and then, but I usually don't have many problems. So it's not necessarily, but it's good to have one in case you do run into fish disease later on. Now lots of nets are very good if you have a lot of different sized fish. For instance, if you have a tetra, if you let's say have tetras as well as very large Oscars, let's say, you can't have just one tiny net because you can't catch the Oscar, but it might be difficult to catch a little 1-inch tetra with a large net meant for the Oscar or a koi. So having a couple different size nets can be helpful. Towels also, you want to make sure you have some sort of designated fish towel. You might not want to use very fancy ones, so you don't necessarily have to go buy some towels, but if you have some older towels, just designate them as fish towels perhaps. Also plastic bags, just when you buy fish you might want to keep those because some fish stores have warranty. For instance, if the fish doesn't survive for a week, then you can bring it back and you can get a new one, or just you can get your money back or get a new fish. So that's good to keep the bags. You can transport them in something so you don't have to find your own mode of transport. Automated feeders is another feature. I've never gone into those, so I've never invested in buying one. But they can be good, I guess. I don't know how well it would work for saltwater, but The unmanned feeder is only oriented towards freshwater. You would fill it with lake food and it'd be set on a timer to feed the fish, and it's very helpful, I think, if you didn't have a lot of time. So if you would like to have an aquarium, this might be something worth investing in. And aerators and bubblers is usually a feature that would go with the hospital tank, because you might not have an extra power head lying around that could work just as fine. Aerators and bubblers are also good if you want to culture some live food like brine shrimp. That's also a good thing to have offhand. I can go into culturing live foods later. So here's just some basic equipment. If you have any other questions about equipment, what sort of equipment you'd like to get, or want me to give my opinion about a certain type of equipment, then just shoot me an email from the description below. For the next video, click here. I forgot to mention, for saltwater, there's a thing called the hydrometer, which allows you to measure how salty your water is, and this is a must. I can't believe I forgot this, but it's just to make sure that your water is not too salty or too fresh, and it is very good that you know that, otherwise you could kill your fish pretty fast. So make sure to buy that if you want a saltwater or brackish tank.